Welcome back to the Piping Pastor. Well, greeting you today from a rather chilly El Paso. The cold weather that's been affecting pretty much everyone. Snow in New Orleans, which just blows me away. Snow on the beaches in Florida, which is crazy. So we haven't had any snow here. I mean, it hasn't gotten that bad, but it has been rather cold at night and at early morning. Which you wouldn't think, when you move to Texas on the Mexican border, you would just think warmth, but not the case. On this chilly day, I'm enjoying some Joe's Blend by Mylan Tobacconist. Great blend. I've kind of been going in reverse order recently. Instead of having the deep English and the Balkan and things like that, like later in the evening, I've been doing them early, and then like as a last smoke of the day, switching to the Virginias. In particular, recently it's been Capstan, because happily that tobacco is going to continue on. I don't know what kind of or where the blending components come from for Mylan. I don't know where he gets his blending components. But I bought this before we moved from Maryland. I got a pound of it, so I still have plenty of it left. So it may have changed with the recent STG thing. I understand there's been some videos where people have been complaining about Boswell's mixes, that they were over Cavendished, which I don't know, could be the case. I have no idea. I also bought a pound of Northwoods before we moved too, so I'm well and truly stocked up on that. So, but hey, it could be the case. I don't know. But they're both Mylan and Boswell's. They're both great blenders. They know what they're doing. So I'm sure if they have to source from somewhere else, they'll figure it out and they'll get the blend sorted. And if not, I'm sure they'll come up with something equally as delicious. But I want to get straight into our sermon for today because it's a bit of a lengthy section. It's the end of the sermon, so this will be wrapping up. And then, as I mentioned, go back to the poetry and the Bible series after this. But I wanted to get into this because there's a section here that it seems he's kind of going off on a tangent. Because remember, he's been talking about Enoch and Noah and them being exceptional people. Exceptional because they were listening to the word of God, not the people around them, and because because like Noah especially was affected by the moral decline of society, and then actually did something about it. So he's talking about that, and he kind of goes into this little discussion of the flood. So, and that's what I want to get to start with here. Keep in mind, this is written in 1899. Some years ago, it was usual to refer wholly to the time of the deluge the more ancient animal remains which have been discovered in caverns or beneath the surface of the earth. But more recent science urges us that these remains simply imply, at least generally, a higher antiquity, and are found under circumstances for which no universal flood would sufficiently account. It may be so, but is there anything in the text of the Bible which obliges us to narrow down to 6,000 years, or in any way whatsoever distinguish the measure of the earth's antiquity short of admitting absolute eternity? On the contrary, between the original creative act and the description of that gradual process by which through successive periods, days they are called in the Eastern idiom, this world will be brought into its present state, there is room for measurement of less interval. I should rather say for a series of intervals. And if that be so, who shall say that this many of the animal, it may be some apparently human, which are now pointed to as hostile or at least damaging to the faith of Christians? After all, only relics and accords of bygone catastrophes, of which, previous to the creation and present order of things, this globe has been the scene, and by which the ages of probation, accredited to moral beings who have preceded us here, were by the judgment of the great moral ruler violently closed. So, 1899. This is important because at this time, this is when dispensationalism was starting to gain some steam. So, and I've talked about dispensationalism in the series I did on eschatology like a year ago. So if you want to go look that video up, it's under Theology Talks, eschatology. But so this is when people start talking about dispensationalism, and so he's saying, well, it's currently, science is pointing us to this other direction that we should consider, because nothing in the Bible necessitates that we understand the earth being 6,000 years old. Currently, I think the young earth creationism is 9,000 is the current figure. But back then it was around 6,000 was what they were thinking. But he's like, there's nothing that really in the Bible that says that we have to believe that, right? It could be that it was an eternity of time and there were human-like creatures before us. We don't know because we weren't there. We don't have the authority. We don't have the scriptural account of the actual process, right? We have a poetic account of the process. But when God says day in the Eastern idiom and when it's translated as an interval, he's like, a lot could have happened, right? There's nothing to say that the earth is not super, super old, right? It is true that we here all together in a region, it is true that we are here all together in a region of hypothesis. But I submit that there is at least nothing in Revelation which necessarily contradicts it. While if it be true, it yields support to the argument of the apostle, it justifies the generous faith of the patriarch. So what he's saying is like, and we're all just talking about hypothesis, right? When the scientists are saying this and they're it could be older than this and yada yada. He's like, yes, okay, we're talking about these things in terms of a hypothesis, right? But he's like, Revelation demonstrates that no matter which way you go with it, it demonstrates the generous faith of the patriarch of Noah. Not that Noah's faith had anything to do with such speculations. Noah didn't sit around thinking, how old is the earth, right? Religious men may be glad to harmonize their convictions with the advancing and often inconsistent conclusions of human knowledge, but the foundation of their faith is one and invariable. They believe that he who made the world can control it. And when his purpose is clear to them, they do not allow themselves to lose sight of it simply because their imaginations are powerfully impressed by the spectacle of a settled and common order of continuance or execution. They are, therefore, in their deepest sympathies, independent of scientific arguments without being at all indifferent to them. They walk by faith and not by sight. They are certain that whatever difficulties may be urged against God's declared will at the moment, God will, in the long run, justify God's self to men and to vindicate the wisdom of those in the days of trial and who in the trials of darkness have taken God at God's word. So there's a lot there in that section, but essentially what he's saying here, okay, that in their deepest sympathies, they are independent of scientific arguments without being indifferent to them. And this is the crux of the research of science and religion. The idea that we're independent of scientific thought in that we look at the revelation of God and the truths of the Bible and so on and so forth, and faith as the higher truth, as the source of all reality, right? That doesn't mean that we're indifferent to science. Don't have to be. They don't have to be in conflict. God is a God of order. God is the ultimate truth. Science is the penultimate truth. Science is us trying to figure out what God has done. So God created the universe in an ordered fashion because God is a God of order, right? With these higher principles and higher laws and things that we can't possibly understand just now. And we're like little kids trying to work out the math that Einstein has done, right? And we can get little bits of here and there, right? Because the equation is absolutely true. The equation is absolutely perfect. We just don't have the ability to understand the entire equation, but we can understand parts of it, right? But it doesn't mean that those parts that we understand are the whole truth. There's a lot more there, but it all leads to God. And so as we discover more, as we learn more about that equation, as we understand more of the math, he's saying that's where, we can be impressed by it, but we need to be independent of it, because if we're just focused on the math and not the person who wrote the math equation, then we're missing the forest for the trees. We're not indifferent to it. We don't discard math, science, reason, logic, and things of that nature, because they also all point to God. So he's saying, be aware of it, but not be indifferent to it. Another point to be observed in Noah is his perseverance under difficulties. His faith was a practical principle, and it upheld him in the face of serious discouragements. He might have been easily persuaded that there could be no real necessity for his personally exerting himself, that the threatened disorder would scarcely touch one who was already 480 years old, that he would be enough to warn his children what was coming, and he himself would probably have laid to his rest. Why should he arouse himself in such an advanced life to such an effort that required of him, instead of leaving it to be undertaken by younger hands? The answer is in his conscience. He heard God say to him, "Build me an ark of gopher wood." Now it seems that he's kind of like gone off the road and then gone back, right? Because he was talking about Noah and Noah reacting against the moral decline and being obedient, and then zoop, over here he's talking about creation and scientific inquiry and how it is that we can be okay with science, not be indifferent to science, but look at the higher principles. And then boom, he's back on Noah, which again, it seems kind of like a knee-jerk reaction, like we're not really sure why he's doing that, but it comes together here. Again, Noah may naturally have dealt upon the great mechanical instructive difficulties of such an undertaking. It is not to be supposed that these were left to be found out for the first time by modern criticism. So he's saying in his last couple of paragraphs here, when Noah found out about this revelation of God, he said, I'm 480 years old, whatever, lay me to rest. Let the kids do it. They're younger, they can build it, right? It's going to be taxing, it's going to be difficult, it's going to be a challenge, and who needs all that? I'm nearly 500 years old. Checking out, done. Noah doesn't do that because he had revelation of God and he's being obedient to God. And it's not because he didn't know it wasn't going to be hard. He's the pastor here is saying, it's not like it's just modern critics who look at the construction of the ark and say, that would have been a major undertaking. Of course, Noah would have known that it would have been a major undertaking as well, even at his advanced age. Okay, he's obedient and he does it anyway. How could such an ark be built so as to secure at once sufficient space and safety? How could it be provisioned, lighted, and worked? How could the several representatives of the animal races be so gathered as to enter it? How would it be possible to preserve them under conditions of weather and temperature so unlike their own? And when the scourge had passed, how would it be possible to enter again to the earth on a solitary colonist amid traces of so gigantic a desolation? Well may Noah's heart have sunk within him when God said to him, "Build me an ark of gopher wood." Yet he only lived to obey. Moreover, Noah had begun his work and to continue it, not merely without active support and sympathy, but under the public opinion which was not so much hostile as contemptuously cynical. So not only does he take this massive undertaking, incredibly difficult in later years of his life, he doesn't even do it with any help. No one's helping him, no one's encouraging him, no one's cheering him on. He's being surrounded by contemptuously cynical population. What this extraordinary outlay of labor and skill for? What was its purpose and meaning? How was it other than the crochet of a merely visionary fanatic? Did he really think that his fancies would become true, and that the settled order of nature, as well as the civilization and progress of human life, were to be buried beneath the flood which he dreamt of? Why was everyone else wrong when he was right? Was his private opinion to be weighed against the collective experience and judgment of mankind? How they must have mocked at the entire undertaking, and how they must have, in their aversion to the awful idea, revenged themselves upon its form and details. So you're seeing Noah had to have had doubts. I'm the one who heard this. Why am I going against what everyone else is saying, what everyone else is doing? Everyone else is mocking and making fun of this. Why am I engaging in this massive undertaking? I see we're almost at 15 minutes here. So I'm going to leave it there. I thought I could get this all in one video, but there's still quite a bit here to get into. But that sets the stage, and hopefully will make you interested for the next one. So We will come back to this in next week's video, where we wrap up the sermon finally, and we can, and it gets back into morals and ethics and the execution of faith and so on and so forth. And it ties back in that whole science and religion discussion about creationism earlier. So it's a wonderful sermon. It's very deep. And remember, this was written, in 1899, so 126 years ago, and still deals with a lot of the problems that we look at today: science, religion, morals, ethics, and standing against what the crowd says and does. So I think it's a great sermon, and we'll finish it next week. Until then, happy reading.